So just a couple of more things I have in my mind. One of them is something I'd like to point out. Vaporwave does not use generally they are very normal samples, old music, but sometimes their samples are very obscure. So one of these examples I could find was that there was some dude who used to work at a company which got closed down, Kmart, which was basically a supermarket, and this dude had audio files of all their music and advertisements which used to play in the supermarket, and he put it out there on the internet, and they a lot of producers used those samples. Basically it did the same thing, slowed it down, blah blah blah. We know if a producer listens to it, they know what's been done to it. But that's the interesting part of it, the obscurity of it. Nobody would really think of taking a sample out of a Kmart or a supermarket sort of a song and then turn it into a different sort of a song, which is vaporwave, laid back listen to. That is one thing I'd like to point out. Any comments?
Uh,
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, it's this whole sample thing. Like again, Tanmay, I think you always find like sensitive points. You touch a nerve always. It's sampling is so I see the genius behind it, wanting to sample Kmart like stuff, sounds, whatever, and making full tracks out of that. That is definitely genius. But at the same time, now that you mention a lot of producers use obscure samples, I don't really think it's that hard anymore. Like so I we shit on internet culture always. We're like, अच्छा ऐसा 2 minute में गाना बना लिया ये वो, but at the same time you're using the internet to thrive, and that just goes to show that today if you have some kid in Faridabad who wants to make vaporwave or lo-fi hip hop and he's 15 years old, like living in the times of COVID, never been to Japan, he can quickly fire up YouTube, take a sample of some random Japanese anime or whatever, some Japanese city pop song. Sure, it requires effort to actually seek it out, but if you don't know Japanese and if you don't know the context, any sample will sound cool enough. You know what I mean? Like, so I recently just took my grandfather's tape machine because he doesn't need it anymore, and like it's part of my aesthetic. So like I'm using tape samples now. I use some of his tapes. I went out to Chor Bazaar in Mumbai. It's like one of those markets where you get a lot of old stuff, and I bought like cassette tapes for $40 per tape, and I've been sampling those. So I'm not trying to point out a difference between me and the guy who would get an easy sample, but it's just the process is more rewarding when you seek your own samples as opposed to making it like a 5 minute affair, where you're going on to YouTube, ripping a file and being like, oh, this is my loop. So like that guy who sampled the Kmart tracks, it's that art is very close to him. It's very honest because it's from his life. He worked at a Kmart, he had those sounds, and then he used them to make a record out of it. But at
I'm
the
not
same
sure.
time,
I'm not sure if he made the music. He just put it out there, and other people just used it, just pointing it out.
okay, so whichever way, like, so he made something of his life available to others. But if you see this like fetish with like Asian culture, Orientalism, or whatever you want to call it, like you'll have a cis white male living in Canada, like, naming his tracks in Japanese and ripping Japanese samples without knowing jack about what they mean, and the context being lost in translation and retranslation. Like, I feel like that it's cool to do it once maybe because you were like, oh, I liked this intonation or I liked the way they said this word. Like in Japanese you have a lot of words which, like, you could be like, oh, I like kawaii or how it sounds, so sure, I'll sample it. But to 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 sample things without knowing what they mean or where they come from, I'm not really like a big fan of that, honestly. So that's my comment. Like, it's not, this is not, unfortunately, the 80s where you're cutting your own sample, finding your own sample, and then, because even then you look at, like, you listen to Jay Dilla or whoever, like you listen to some of the old sampled stuff, they dug through crates to make those they made those samples on their own, and they found them. So for me, if I was digging through tapes again, so I found a lot of Spanish guitar tapes in that store when I went to buy tapes, right? And I bought them. I'm still yet to sample them, but I will someday. So if I go to a store and I find a Japanese pop cassette tape, I will sample it because I found it and it was a part of my life. It doesn't exist on someone else's server or computer, which I've just lifted for my own purpose. Sorry,
I
I'm a little critical of that. Sorry.
no, it's a good point. I'll try to kind of chill it down from there, make it less aggressive. Not that it was. Um, I feel like Adi is right in some aspects, because as somebody who is does production work, and who uses samples now and then, I've seen a lot of internet samples. I have seen there are a lot of sites which give you samples. You just they give you all kinds of samples. You just have to download it, pay like $1 or something, and you can just download it and use it for free, basically royalty free. um, which is great, because the samples are great and somebody's put in work to record them and put them up for other people to use. He's getting paid for it, which is great. uh, but like he mentioned, it's different from what other people used to do in old times, where they used to make their own samples. And getting your own samples has another joy in it, because for many different songs recently, in fact, I recorded my own samples, like for example, not even like an electronic sample. For example, one of my artists who I was working with was traveling to Kerala, and during the rainy seasons, and I had her record the rain in different when Kerala it's heavy rain, and it becomes really intense, the rain. I had her record it in different areas and different situations, like from inside the car, from next to a window, from covering, putting maybe through a curtain, from the back of the car to the door open, to the window open, stuff like that. And when I got these samples, because I directed them, I said, okay, let's try taking a sample from here in this situation, this position. I felt a different kind of um, satisfaction, I guess, or like it was worth something, So I guess it's great that you get samples that other people have made, but as somebody I guess who's into music and who really enjoys it, getting the samples on my own was way more fulfilling. It just felt better. I could have easily gone. I have gotten sounds from an online source, and I've used it for a lot of podcast related work that I've done. But again, getting an original sample is just way better. It's just way better. Like, it's not something that you can kind of explain. It's like it's aesthetic. It's a vibe. It's a feeling, right? That's what the whole conversation has been. So I guess somewhat I'm on Adi's side, but